All right, so if my fellow hosts can watch the participants or new participant popping up and let them in, that'll be great. I will keep a watch as well. All right. Good morning.
Stephen, sorry, Stephen.
Yeah.
I was just going to check. I can take minutes if there's no other.
Oh, okay. Yes,
takers.
I
will
was.
do that.
Yeah, I was getting into that, but thank you for volunteering.
No worries.
All right, so I'm Stephen Chu. I'm from the Australian Digital Health Agency, and I am chairing today's meeting. And as by way of the administrative process, Brett has kindly stepped up to do minute taking. So I thank you for that, Brett. So we have a very rich agenda for today, and I have I've done a bit of time boxing, and we'll see how it goes. So we have about 8 agenda items or 9 agenda items on the list. Hang on. It will be useful that I share my screen, so I need to do that. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so what we have is about 9 agenda items on the screen. So I did a bit of best guesstimate, and I try to time box those items, and hopefully it will get us through with the time boxing, and we will pursue in that way. So I will also pop the link of the agenda in the chat, so that if you want to peruse on your own machine separately, you are free to do so. So first order of the agenda is that I would like to get us to approve the agenda as they are before we get back to the first item. So does anyone has any change requests as to the agenda items that are displayed on the screen and also on the link that you would have access to? All right, I take silent as a sign that everyone is happy with the agenda going forward. So first order of the business is to approve the meeting minutes of the last meeting, which happens a fortnight ago, which is on the 6th of, the 5th of June. And again, I will pop the link into the chat. So therefore, you can take a quick look if you wish to do so. So I would like to entertain a motion, unless someone wants more time to peruse the minutes. Otherwise, I will entertain a motion and a second to approve the meetings of the previous minutes as shown on the screen and as the link that I sent on the chat.
I'm happy to move.
All right, thank you, Marika. So I have a mover. Anyone want to second that?
I'm happy to second, Stephen.
Thank you, Danielle. So Danielle second the motion. Anyone wants to have any discussions about any of the bullet points that we have on the meeting minutes? Okay, hearing none, I will consider the meeting minutes accepted by general consensus. By way of 807 international standards, we don't go into the voting. So we'll assume that there is general consensus. So that meeting minutes is accepted. Okay, all right. Second bullet item. All right. Release plan update. All right. Brett,
Yeah,
you
hi,
want to
Steve.
take
Just
this
wanna hit
item
that-
away?
Yeah, I was just going to do a 2-minute. I've been trying to put together just the sequence of events with the intention releases and ballot plans going forward. So it's just a note that there is a page where I'm trying to maintain that. So I think people that are working on various standards for various IGs, it would be great if we could try and keep that up to date and just let people know what's coming in the future as well. And obviously if you see any errors, that would be good to let us know. So that was all for that one.
Do you want to have a bit of discussion on that, or is this for notice only and we can come back for discussions at some other time?
I'm happy just to say for notice, but obviously we'll happily take feedback on if people wanted it improved, or if there's issues that let us know, and we'll try and.
Do you want to? Do you want to suggest how people can submit their inputs?
I think just comments on the page would be fine, and we can review those. That's probably the easiest.
Sounds good.
Yep.
All right. Any timeline for providing input?
No, and I think we'll just try and maintain this going forward. So it'll be a working document that's live. So we'll continue to update it as we get more information or things change.
Cool. All right. Sounds good then. All right. So next item will be on the AU Core FMM 1 endorsement. Danielle, this is your agenda item. Take it away. Do you want to drive, or do you want
No,
me?
I mean we can look at from what that is. So based on when we had our conversation on what the necessary evidence was for FMM1 in our last meeting, and we did a sort of a test drive with that with the current group for AU Base. So coming through with AU Core, we've got these artifacts here that have gone through an AU Core vote to agree from the AU Core TDG that these should be marked as FMM1. And there's the JIRA tickets that are there for 3 separate ones for those groups. So I think it's worth noting, because I'm not sure how much detail we want to do in the FHIR Work Group, that except for the 2 actor definitions, hang on, I'm just going to pop.
Do you want to drive the screen, or do you want me to click on any of the links?
Not yet. So of the list of AU Core artifacts, the profiles, capability statements, search parameters, they have 0 errors and 0 warnings. And the AU Core TDG has marked them as mark as FMM1. And the 2 at the top, the actor definitions. Now, if you want to click on that,
this
Stephen,
one?
yes. Click on that JIRA. So these have 2, and it should actually have on there if you scroll down. So we had to do, because there are 2 errors in the QA report, we went and did an exception. We went and accepted this as an exception in the AU Core Technical Design Group. And I just wanted to highlight that for the FHIR Work Group, that there are 2 QA report errors. These have been confirmed from Graham to be IG publisher errors, and that will come through in a future release. So back to the FHIR Work Group on whether or not we're happy to endorse FMM1 for that set of artifacts that's come from the AU Core TDG. Personally, I'd like to motion that we endorse that.
So do we want to take them one by one, or do we want them to take them as a bulk?
I think this should be a bulk vote.
Okay.
that
do you
this group of
want
artifacts
to
is,
peruse the AU Core ticket and also the allergy endorsement as well?
I don't, but if someone
Okay.
else does, I can declare right now, if you go look at it, the QA report shows 0 errors and 0 warnings. And
Well, let's have a
these,
quick look. So it's just for the purpose of property. So that one has just 1 warning and 0 error.
it did, that has been fixed.
Okay.
So if
has
you
been
click on
fixed.
the QA report, it'll show AU Core organization no longer has a warning. That has actually been fixed.
Okay. All right. So let's very quickly take a look at that one as well, just as a matter of process. So therefore, we are all satisfied. Okay, so those are publisher errors and non-material. So therefore, we are taking those 3 as a block vote. So motion, please.
I motion the FHIR Work Group endorses the FMM1 marking from the AU Core Technical Design Group for the artifacts in this list.
Thank you. Anyone want to second it? Michael Osborne, thank you. I assume that your hands up is seconding the motion.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, now this one we do have to vote. On that. Let me.
We should be able to run a poll, yeah.
Do you want to set up the poll? Happy for you to do that if you want to.
I think we should just do hands, but because
okay.
of course you and I can't vote for it.
Let's do that. Oh yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So right, let's call to the question. Anyone want to oppose? All right, there's no one oppose. Anyone wants to abstain? All right, I don't see any response to the abstaining question. So we have 16 of them. 16 participants minus the chair, which is me, who I can't vote. Do you want to count out as a delegate for voting yourself, Danielle? Or
yes, yeah, I do count.
yeah, okay. So therefore, in that case, then we have, because we have 16 participants, so is 1500, motion carried. Okay, that's quicker than I expected, which is jolly good. Item number 4, Brett, I notice for intention to ballot the AU base.
Yeah, so coming up to the August ballot period, part of the process we have to go through is to put in a notice of intent to ballot, which means we're actually going to take IGs to the ballot. And this cycle, it's intended that we're going to talk about the other ballots that are coming for the next items, but part of what we will need to do to support the other specs being balloted is also Ballot AU Base. So basically this is the intent to ballot it. The likely release number is 422, and there's just the details there of the of our intent and some assertions on.
Let me know if you want me to scroll.
That's it. so really, it's that's the full. So it's really just the formality of saying we will move to ballot, and probably the prerequisites declaration is probably the thing that.
So what is the level?
Yeah.
What is the level of ballot? Is that informative?
It's a working standard, this one. So we're continuing on. Yeah, we're continuing on. Basically, which is equivalent to like the old STU level.
Yep.
And that's to align with our intent to do the others, to do AU Core at least to working standard as well. So since there's that dependency as well, that continues on to be resolved. So basically the reconciliation will go together with an aim of getting an AU Core working standard done as well.
All right, sounds good.
Yep.
So do I take it that you're motioning this one?
Yes, I would like to motion we just accept this as just our intent to ballot the spec.
All right, thank you. Anyone wants to second the motion?
I'm happy to second that motion, Stephen.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. All right, so any further discussions? Any comments? All right, hearing none, let's call to the questions. Anyone who wants to abstain? All right, hearing none, then anyone wants to oppose? All right, no abstain, no opposition. So the number of participants remains the same. So therefore we have 1500. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
We are doing very well in terms of timing. So it took much lesser than I expected. Pretty good. Next one, Danielle, is your proposal. So this one is NIB for AU Core.
Yeah, same thing, but for core. So if you could just scroll to the next page, because again, these are short documents. So this is AU Core, same thing, August R1, going for working standard. And in terms of prerequisites, yes, we will have the past ballot reconciliation complete. We have put in the the variant statement now is in AU Core, and we just got our endorsement of FMM level. So I guess we can, I mean, at the time that I submitted this, we'd requested it, but that's come through. And of course, backwards compatible is not applicable because this is first release.
Sounds good. Before I entertain a motion, does anyone wants to look at the variance statement? I can click and show the page. All right. If there is no one who want or need to see that, then I'm happy to entertain a motion.
I'll motion. It's something I've submitted, so I'll motion that we accept the notice of intent to ballot for AU Core R1.
Thank you, Danielle. We have a motion on the table. Anyone who would like to second that? All right, David McKillops, thank you for seconding that. All right, any further questions or discussions? All right, if no questions, no discussions, let's call to the questions. Anyone who want to abstain? Hearing none. Anyone who wish to oppose? All right, hearing none again. So pretty good. Motion carry 1500 again. Thank you. Wow, we are doing well. We're flying color in terms of speed. Okay. Next agenda item number 7, name context extension profile.
Hang on. Number 6.
Oh,
There's
sorry.
2.
I beg your pardon.
Yep.
Yeah,
no worries.
We snapped that one in, Steve. Yeah, we stuck that in just before the meeting.
All right. So are we okay to progress?
Yeah. If you can click on the eRequesting, not that one. So we've missed number 6.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. All right. All right.
So same thing, but for eRequesting, although noting that if you pop to the next page, Stephen, for eRequesting, this is a for comment, not a working standard. So it's, again, the Q3 and having the eRequesting FHIR IG come out for comment. So in that sense, in terms of prerequisites, past ballot reconciliation is not applicable. It's never gone out for ballot yet. We've got the variance statement in there now. And because it's the first one and for comment, it's not applicable about endorsement for FHIR maturity, model level, or backwards compatible.
Sounds good.
Richard.
Richard, you are on mute.
I don't think he is, though. It might be double muted or something.
Okay. Richard, you have your hands up. Okay, you have. All right, the hands is.
Maybe you want to type the question in the chat. What level are we balloting this to? For comment. That is the ballot type. So it goes for comment,
Yep.
informative,
So
working standard, and then normative.
Is here.
Yeah.
For comment. Yep. Oh, my cursor is not working. Anyway, okay, cool.
Okay,
all right,
no worries.
so, all right, that's good. All right, awesome. All right, anyone has any other questions or comments? All right, in that case, then I'm happy to entertain a motion.
Again, I'm submitter, so I should motion this. I motion that the FHIR Work Group accepts the notice of intent to ballot for AU eRequesting for comment.
Sounds good. So Daniel, put this motion on table. All right. Anyone want to second that?
I'll second it, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. All right. So we already had some discussions. Just want to have the process completed. Any further discussions or questions? Okay, hearing none, then let's put the questions. Anyone who wants to abstain? All right, hearing none. Anyone who wants to oppose? All right, hearing none. Again, we still have 16 participants, so therefore the number would still be 1500. Motion carried. Thank you. All right, the next one, I think I have it up there, but never mind. I will click on the link. All right, so Brett, I think this is your item.
Yeah, so this was a e-vote that was run now quite a while ago, but there were not many voters, and we also had a couple of referrals to telecom items there. So I'd like to possibly look at those referrals.
So do you want me to click any of the links and show them, or?
I can see Richard's question there. I don't know if Richard gets his sound on, he can talk to it, but you can see Richard there's asked the question as to why practitioner is not included. So just for context, this is the coded name use context, which was primarily the support identifying which name is to be used for IHI validation. And so at the moment, that's the extent of the what the code system supports. So I think
Richard,
yeah.
Richard, do you have further comments or you have further questions?
Is my microphone working?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, my question was one I typed in there. Why is practitioner excluded from the list of suitable contexts? Because I would have thought that we would want this to also be useful for practitioner to help us with practitioners identifiers.
Brett, you want to further response or?
I think we could have some discussion and agree to that. I don't. Yeah, I think it's yeah, we only really considered the context as defined, but if it was, I think, desirable to do that, we certainly renamed the extension to be possibly used on other artifacts. But I don't. It might be good, Stephen, to look at the name context.
All right. So
hit the name context extension.
Okay, I will do that. Ruben,
Yeah.
I noticed that you have your hands up, so I'll get back to you once
I just asked to have a look at the extension, so thanks for reading my mind, Brett.
Yeah.
When you look at the extension, it does mention other contexts beyond IHI validation, like, for example, dead names. So I can't see why, if there are other contexts, having it on a practitioner would be something we wouldn't want to support.
Yep, that's fair.
So I have the page up, Brett. Where do you want me to navigate?
So just you'll see there the statement end of the narrative there that says this extension may be used for the following elements, and so it's just at the moment limited to patient name, related person name, and person name. But I think if the group wanted to add practitioner name, that would be, I think, okay.
Does that need to be a motion?
That's what I was about to say. Do we want to have a motion?
I'm happy to move that I propose that we add practitioner name to the extension that we're proposing as a valid use case.
Thank you for the motion. Anyone who want to second that?
Stephen, I was just wondering if we could have a look at the value set before I can vote on that. I just want to see the values match a practitioner use. A practitioner
sounds name. Like a reasonable request. Let's have a look at the value set.
I think the answer will be no. You can see there's only one term defined. Yeah. Okay. However, it is a codable concept. So it is possible to have it's extensible as well. Yeah, exactly. So so you could introduce codes or just use the text expression if you so desired. So it would still be usable.
Oh, we could add a code for HIPAA validation.
We could. That's a different motion.
So that's the only one that we have here at the moment, and because the value set itself is extensible, so it doesn't preclude anyone adding one to there. So Ruben, I know that your hands up. Let's look at this one to see whether or not anyone wants to do anything about this thing, or we want to come back after we sort of take a motion on sort out the motion of adding the practitioner to that. So Ruben, coming back to you, is your hands up related to this that we're talking about, or the value set that we're talking about?
It was actually up to have a look at the value set as well, but I will have other comments once we get to this motion.
Okay. All right. So we'll circle back to you as well. So at the moment, we have a motion on the table. Anyone wants to second the motion?
I'll second it.
What's the motion again?
The motion is to add element ID provider name, practitioner name to this list. Richard, is the motion clear to you?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
All right. So Ruben, are you still okay with seconding the motion?
I will second it.
Yep. Okay. So we have the motion I made, and also Ruben seconding it. So any further discussion? Ruben, you indicated that you have a comment to make. Do you want to make it here now, or you want to wait?
Yeah, because I think it's probably going to become a friendly amendment, really. I think the name of this extension, name context, is just too broad. And so I'd like to suggest that we consider making it more specific, given that it refers to individuals or persons, to something like human name context or individual name context.
We did discuss whether or not we would want to put it somewhere else, and thought we might, which is why it was kept that wide.
Yeah, we even discussed
so this
maybe
could
organization
potentially
names.
Yeah, that's what, and
yeah.
that's So we either got to go all the way or keep it.
Well, I'm not so
narrow.
sure we do. It's not like we have to land in our final position initially. It's not even draft 0 yet. So I don't think we do have to.
Yeah, being a chair, I am usually very bad at holding back my comments. But I think I see Ruben's point. And the thought that came to me is that we also wanting considering there is a need for setting name context for organization name as well, and that's the reason why I think that Ruben has a point in making a friendly amendment to rename the extension if we are considering excluding organization name.
Organization name is a string and its cardinality is 0 to 1. So under those conditions, it doesn't make sense for organization name to have this sort of support.
Sounds good.
Though alias could, but yes.
Yeah, indeed. Daniel, Ruben has a comment, and I want some response to whether or not his comment or his likely going to be friendly amendment would be supported.
I think there are more comments and questions to go on this extension, so it might be better process-wise to just vote on the do we add practitioner name and then treat the other aspects of this as their own separate amendments, because there's still like Dushi's comments at the bottom of the page that we've not looked at and discussed as a group either.
Yep, sounds like a plan. So let's resolve this motion about adding element ID practitioner name onto it, and so we have we have a motion, we have a second, and we have some discussions already. So let's ask the question of are there any further discussions or questions? All right, hearing none, let's call to the questions. Anyone wants to abstain? Or anyone has any objections to that? Okay, hearing none, the motion is carried with 15-0-0. All right, do we want to visit the value set?
I think we have to.
I think we should.
Okay,
I
we
would
are.
suggest that rather than having IHI validation, we could have something like HI service validation, so that it can be used to. I'll
counter that.
Yep.
And I'm just going to say, while I don't like it being specific like IHI, one of the things we were noting is you can't just have like registry validation, because what Medicare has versus, you know, in one particular registry versus another. And I thought the genesis of this particular extension was being as specific as you possibly can to say it was this particular like registry.
Okay. I was thinking that HIPPIs and HIPPOs and IHIs are all part of the same registry. So I was looking for a term that would be wide enough to cover the three of them. But maybe it is better to have an IHI validation, a HIPPY validation, and possibly at some stage a HIPPO validation, though that doesn't seem likely.
Yeah, I think too. If you took the name, say you brought the name into your system, you may carry this through as well, and it might be useful to have it as a standalone definition of what it is useful for, and in that way too, practitioners can be patients as well. So it's depending on how your system works, it might be good to know it's an IHI and also an HPI validation name. Yeah.
So my thinking was, we could name it after the identifier we're validating, or we could name it after the system that we're validating against. And if we want to name it after the system we're validating against, then IHI is not quite accurate.
I think, is there ever going to be a situation where someone's name is different for IHI validation versus their HPII validation?
Yeah, that's conceivable. I know of a few female doctors who practice under the name they qualified, but personally use their husband's last name. So that can happen.
So that suggests that we want to have it by the identifier type and not the system.
I agree. I'd also, Stephen, like to suggest that I think the changes we're talking about here are actually to the code system. The value set doesn't have to change because it's defined as including all the concepts in the code system.
So, do we have a motion?
I think we have. I think we're moving towards a motion to add a code to the code system.
Mm-hmm. So, do we have some inclination as to which code you want to add to that?
Well, going by the precedent set by the current one, I guess it's HPII-validation as the code display. HPII validation and definition indicates associated name for the HPII validation.
So is that a motion, Ruben?
Oh,
sure. Go on, Richard.
I'm just wondering about the appropriate spelling for HPII in the display and the definition. Does that need a hyphen in it or not? I do not know the answer.
Definitely in the definition. I'm actually, Brett, do you want to clue me in as to why we actually use the term validation in this code system?
Because that's actually the usage.
So is it possible to then have other things like IHI as stored in the HI service, or what else are you ever gonna? What could it be confused with if you didn't have validation?
I don't know. That's yet to be determined. But I mean, it was basically a specific use. Basically, was what was defined. Yeah.
Because this seems like it's trying to capture not just the context but also the usage under that context.
Oh, that's what the definition is. Classify suitable uses or purposes of names.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Phil, do you have a comment to make? I saw your audio freaking in and out.
No, I was just agreeing that you need the hyphen.
Okay, you're just agreeing. Okay, awesome. All right, so I heard that Ruben make a motion of adding HPII validation, and the definitions will be indicates associated name is for HPII with the full spelling validation. All right.
So actually in the code, HPI -I -validation. Cool.
Yep.
Really, in the code, fine. I mean, display and definition, but.
I'd rather not, but
I'd rather not have an extra hyphen in the code.
Yeah,
I agree.
Sorry, in the description, but not the code. Yeah, HPI -validation, and then in the definition, you put in HPI -I and HPI -O. Yeah.
All right, so the code itself is HPII without dash between between the HPI and I, and then HPII dash validation, and the definition is in the case associated name is for HPI dash I validation.
Yeah.
Yep.
So are we in agreement? All right. Looks like that we are in agreement. Any further discussions?
Oh, sorry. Can I just check who moved and seconded that?
I moved it.
Yeah.
I will second it.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. So we have the motion on the table. I haven't heard any further questions or discussions. Let's call to the question. Anyone who wants to abstain? Anyone who wants to oppose? All right. Motion carry 15-0-0. All right. So we still need to deal with comments from Dushi. Do we need to look into the other two links, the code system and those also example? I don't think that we need to, but I just want to be sure procedurally.
The last motion was for change to the code system, Stephen. The value set doesn't need to change.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too, we'll like, I think this is just a piece of work now, and we'll add an example to go with that as well.
All right. So code system, we want to change that.
We just motion to change it.
Yeah, that's where the change will be. Yep. Sorry.
So that's done.
Yeah, that bit's done. Yeah.
That's done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So and there's Dushi's comments. Yep.
And then we
Dushi's comments are, now that I've looked
more
at
technical.
them, QA. And I think that can just be, my assumption is that would be accepted when you actually put in the real PR for this, Brett, and that we would review and make sure that it's all meeting the necessary conventions and rules.
Standards. Yeah, exactly. So I think these are more necessary things that have to happen. Yeah.
So these are editorial stuff that will be done or has already been done, right?
Yeah, it's not done yet, but noting that
will be done.
That is needed.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So in that case, with all those issues kind of resolved, so do we want to come back to vote on this profile?
I think we do. I think we want to tackle that as a motion for including it in AU Base.
I would entertain a motion. Any movers?
I would like to move that we complete these items and accept.
So, all right, Brett moves that we accept this to be including in the, is that AU Core or AU Base?
AU Base.
AU Base. All right. Okay. Anyone who second that?
I'll second that, Richard.
All right. Thank you, Richard. All right. So we have a motion. We have a second. Any further discussions? Oh, okay, Ruben, your hand is up.
Yeah. Sorry, Brett, just want to clarify, when we, as part of this motion to add it to AU Base, does that imply that it will be added to the profile of the patient, related person, and practitioner, or not?
It doesn't imply that at all. That is a separate proposal if someone wants that. This just goes in as a usable extension in AU Base. That's the motion.
Noted. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or points of discussions? Okay. Hearing none, I would like to call to the questions. Anyone who wants to abstain? Anyone who wants to oppose? All right, motion carry again with the voting number 15-0-0. All right, that one is done. All right, we are doing relatively well in time. This discussion eats into a few of the time that we have saved in the previous discussions, but we're still well within the time boxing. All right, Danielle, item number 8.
Yeah, I should probably actually drive. So
Okay, I will
let
stop
me just get back
sharing.
to that.
I will let you share.
Yeah,
the
I'll
screen.
just, what's our meeting today? Oh, we're on the 19th. All right, I'll start sharing my screen. Okay, so this is a topic around additional bindings. There's
So you have 30 minutes.
Okay, excellent. Absolutely. Yeah, time box me. We're not going to get through all of these today. I'm just going to refresh for people. So we've talked about this in a couple of previous meetings, and Graham came along to one of them, which was fabulous, and walked through some items. In terms of additional bindings, there is now this extension that's available. That should be a link that goes to the code system where we can get to the extension. Perfect. That lets you do all sorts of things and like talk about and provide documentation about more bindings than you would have already had. You know, we used to just have the preferred binding. And in AU Base, that's led to us doing a lot of slicing, when in reality, all we were trying to do was just say these things exist and you may want to use them, and not really put any stricter controls around those. And we used slicing, and some of those choices were really poor. And in some cases, we've had to leave the identification of terminology purely in informative text above the profile. And with the additional bindings extension coming in, it allows you to do this kind of thing. This is the IPS allergy intolerance profile, by the way, which lets you have your binding for the element, the normative one, and also lets you say other things. We've got a couple of these now in AU Core, which I'll just navigate to that and show you what that looks like as well, which is doing a different use case. So we've made an agreement to do that for our vitals, where if I pop down to, where did we go? I've gone too far. There'll be an additional binding floating around. Oh, I went to the wrong one. It's not on blood pressure. Haha, no wonder. Let's go to body weight, where we have a metric value set in Australia, and we've made the agreement that we're not going to replace the international required binding. Instead, what we're going to do is say there's a metric one here, and we would like you to use it, and therefore it's a candidate, but you're not required to. If I click on code, you actually see more parts of that. There's little documentation here to say use this value set when metric units are preferred. So this is just a little bit of the kind of things that you can do with additional bindings. And we've identified a number of spots on where we want to go through and refactor some of the AU Base profiles to now put those into the actual profile using this extension. I'll go to the first one that is the really obvious one, and that's AU Base pathology result. So if I just pop to that one, pop to the current here, what you'll see here, for example, in our informative guidance is for pathology result, there's an overall SPEAR value set, but then we call out that there's actually these that are components that make up that overall one that may be useful for people to be aware of. So we've put them in the profile specific implementation guidance, but until now we haven't had a way to actually put those inside the profile. If we chose to, it might end up looking like this. And that's really one of the proposals that's coming to this work group. So instead of being silent on these and just leaving them in text up above, to actually represent that component relationship in a machine processable way down here with additional bindings. So that's the first one I want to show everyone. The current, I guess what that currently looks like in Base is, do I have a tab that's just Base? Sorry, obviously got too many tabs going on. I'll just navigate to Base in a cheaty way. We'll just look at pathology result. Where did I put that? Hang on. Under observations. There we go. So this is the current thing. This is our CI build for Base now. We have this profile-specific implementation guidance. But what we have in the profile is just that there. We don't mention the fact that these other things exist in the profile. And what I'm proposing is that we actually include that in our profile so that it looks now like this. So you can actually see that clearly in the structure itself.
Would you show us the detail page for that particular element?
Code?
For code, yes, thank you. Thank you.
No problem. One of the things we have to do if we're going to do this is confirm what the purpose, which one of those codes. So it's a required binding, kind of like how we were doing like obligation and is it shall populate, is it populate if known, etc. When we're representing this, we have to select the semantically appropriate code to represent the relationship we want to talk about. So the value set is required. Here's the full list of what you can choose. I think that's big enough for everybody, is it?
Yes, big enough. Yep.
Excellent. So in terms of the pathology result one, that's really obvious because literally the definition of that overall sphere set is that it is made up of those 4 value sets. So that is the definition of component down the bottom here.
So just for clarification purposes, the component here, component binding, you're not referring to observation.component.
Correct. Component is the type of additional binding. We're saying that this one is a component of what is actually set on that element.
Yeah, so those subsets make up the.
Yeah, I think that might
set.
need a bit of clarification because my initial knee-jerk reaction is that, well, how is it different from the observation? Is that intended for observation.component? So we might need to have a bit of clarification.
Well, we've got essentially the definition that is defined of what that means, which is that this value set, the one that has the component on it, is a component of the base value set.
Okay.
Yeah, because effectively it's just defining usable subsets.
Yeah, it's just that when you just look at the structure definition, before you go to the definition, it's kind of like creates a bit of confusion.
Are the words that are actually on the additional binding description?
We can't. So obviously we can't change purpose. That's literally
documentation.
The code.
Yeah,
so that's just auto-generated. That's the code.
Yeah.
It would be nice if that was hyperlinked, like extensible, so you could click on that. And then in terms of documentation, we add that statement. Here's a default one that I put in now to say what the purpose of this binding could be useful.
Would it help to have a word like subset for, or something? I don't know. That's just
it would have a like purpose component bracket subset or something like that, or in
we can't change anything in that.
Okay, or in the documentation, sort of like that would sort of like minimize the misunderstanding.
So we could say this value set is a
Is a component
or
slash
is a
subset, component slash subset
Yeah.
for reporting, and that will make it clearer.
Okay.
I don't
Yep.
find component at all misleading here.
Well, Richard, the reason why I raised that is that if you look at observation, observation has a observation dot component. So a lot of people, at least for me at the first glance, sort of raised the question as to what exactly that component mean before I went into the definitions. So having something in the documentation there, I said that clarified that would be something that I believe would be useful.
Yeah, for me, I look at the stuff as in a context. I'm looking at observation code, and when I see something talking about component in observation code, it never occurs to me that this would be about observation component code, because that's a different context to the context I'm looking at.
I made that same leap that Stephen did.
All right, well, with two people doing it, I say we should amend the text and clarify and use that word component as part of the sentence just to explain the relationship.
Yeah, and also sort of will be useful to sort of make a semantically equivalent sort of description that components slash subset that would be useful.
All right. Any other suggestions?
Someone
if
put a
not-
comments. I think someone put a comments in. Oh, okay. Got to go. Okay. That's
Because
fine
if not, so this is the JIRA ticket. I'd be keen to make a motion to add in that additional binding. This thing that keeps popping at the top. So I would like to motion that with the friendly amendment, the exception of adding in that clarification in the documentation, that we motion to add in the additional bindings into AU Base pathology result. So I'd like to motion that, please.
All right. So we have a motion on the table. All right. Anyone? Okay. Great, Liam. Thank you. All right. Any further discussions? Anyone who has additional questions that you want to ask? All right. If not, then let's call the questions. Anyone who wants to abstain?
That's Brian, I think.
Brian, you want to abstain?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Abstain. And anyone oppose? All right, hearing none, we have 2 people drop, so we have 14 minus 2, so we have 12. So we have 12. 1 0. 1 being abstain and 0 being oppose.
All right, so that was the easy one to sort of like get into additional bindings and the kinds of things you can do. There are some other spots we've identified. Now, I believe I have how much time left?
You have
10
another.
minutes?
You have another. No, you have another 20 minutes. You're doing well.
All right. We're not going to get through the rest of them. We've got now 2 types of things left. Let's start with the tricky one, because I want to pose this as a logic problem. I'm not really sure what the answer is. We talked this through with Graham, who said this makes sense. I can see why you would want to use additional bindings there, but now we actually need to go ahead and work out how you do that. So if I go to the build, and what we're actually looking at, and we've done this in 2 spots. We've done it in practitioner role and we've done it in organization. And so we've got some fairly complex profile-specific implementation guidance about the coding we want for practitioner role.code. And what we have is a preferred binding, and that is a SNOMED binding. It does healthcare types, basically, healthcare practitioner roles. And so we say, where possible, select a code from that preferred value set. If you're unable to get a code from that value set, usually because you're looking to select a code that isn't a healthcare practitioner, then we'd still like you to select from SNOMED. And then we say, well, if you can't select SNOMED, then maybe you could have a code from ENSCO. But all of that guidance just sits up here away from the profile. And we need to, I think, look at how we can model that using additional bindings. So what are our possible options then? So really there's 3 value sets, I guess, being talked about. One is the practitioner role one, which is a subset of SNOMED. One is basically just SNOMED, or maybe even a wider value set of SNOMED. We don't have the equivalent, like, wider set of all possible role codes in a value set yet that we could refer to. But it's one thing we might need to look at doing. And then we've got ENSCO. So that suggests to me that we would keep our preferred one. So we wouldn't be changing the preferred binding on code. So that stays as practitioner role preferred. But what we might end up doing is having 2 instances of additional bindings to put in those terms what these 2 points from profile-specific implementation guidance are trying to say. I don't know if that's possible, but I want us to have a look if we can, rather than just leaving this information up here, actually represent those on that code element using additional bindings. Liam.
Yeah, I was just wondering what the component would, the binding type would be on doing something like that. Otherwise,
Exactly.
thinking about the pathology example that we just showed, could we alternatively have a value set that included all 3 value sets that you just mentioned, and then have components again? I mean, you can't really specify the preferredness of in that order, but
which is why I don't think we'd want to do that. We have come to an agreement that it is that SNOMED set, that particular value set, is the preferred binding. So I think it would actually be a step backwards to take away that clarification that is the preferred binding. I think.
From a broader standard specification perspectives, wouldn't you want to name one value set and make it extensible, and then say that if you want to extend it, then you can pick from the other 2 as well, and then leave it to implementation specific IG to do the legwork?
We could do something similar to that. We need to keep the binding preferred because this is base, not core. We can set it to be extensible in core. And we could do something similar with just listing the other 2 in additional bindings.
Yeah. I would think you'll probably go, they're also preferred bindings, but you have to give the context with the rules that you've got written.
Yeah.
Another one would be to use them as candidates. It's a candidate to substitute in some situations.
I don't think we want to say that, because I think we really do want to prefer the bound set that we've got.
Yeah. What does candidate actually mean here? Is this mean this is a proposed future one, or I'm not quite sure what the full-on semantics of candidate there is.
Yeah, I believe that's what it means, Richard. I believe it's more that there's an intention to move to it.
Well, wouldn't candidate means that something that you can consider?
Yeah.
Do you say that's a required binding, that the type?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we can't add another one type.
We can add another type, but we have to do that by updating the value set. Like updating the code system to add an additional type. We can't just add one ourselves. So we have to go through international to do that.
Yeah.
Which, if we come up with something that we think is actually meaningful for a usable case, we should do that. So I'm just looking for the international notes on where this was. Because you can do some really, really interesting things with additional bindings in talking about the usage context.
Could you have preferred on the one that you want, and then candidate on the other two?
My concern with candidate, and we might need to clarify that, is I think candidate is, well, I guess that's the question on how does a candidate interact with a preferred binding on the main, like the base value set.
See, that reads to me that it's a complete replacement of some settings, right? As opposed to additional.
I have the concern too, because it reads to me that it is a replacement and it's not an additional things to consider. So we don't want to consider that if our use case is to serve them up as additionals.
Yeah. Is extensible, I mean, if you look at extensible, is the idea that they're wanting to say for extensible that this is an additional set of values that you might use in special contexts. Now that's not, I mean, extensible is a lousy name for that, but in addition to the base binding, not a replacement, usually in a particular context. That stuff in brackets and at the end makes it sounds like this is actually meant to be an extension binding, not an extensible binding.
I would suggest that that is actually the correct one to represent this. If you can't do something from the first one, just pick something else from SNOMED. I would suggest that that is actually then correct in additional bindings. If we have a value set that subsumes this one, because they're all from SNOMED as well, and is the wider SNOMED set, then that seems to line up with this text here.
Yeah, I think it's a lousy name, I think, because it's not extensible. But this isn't an extensible binding. This is more a case of this is an extension. So I think their code is perhaps, but they call it conformance binding. Well, that's just bizarre.
Mm.
So the clock is ticking away. So
yeah, no, that's fine. I never thought that we would get to the answer in this one. I wanted to pose it to the group and to have that focus as we sort of look at these different content. So how long do I have left?
You have another 9 minutes.
Ooh, let's go to the next problem then. We'll leave that one there.
Okay, before we leave that one, do you want to propose some homework, or do you want to yourself do some homework and come back at the next call?
Yeah, so I'm going to try and work on this. Brett and Michael Osborne have said they're happy to help. I'm happy with other people as well who'd like to put their hand up to try to identify a proposal if we can get to one that transforms that profile-specific implementation guidance into a set of additional bindings. Just chat me on like Zulip if you want to have a go at it. That would be fantastic.
Okay, sounds good. So homework to be done, and then we come back for this future course.
Yep. So let's go to the next one. This is not the hard one. So I've navigated away somehow from the meeting minutes. Oops. It might actually be mentioned on here. Perfect. Do love Jira connections. Okay. So next one are our medication stuff. So all that slicing, basically, all of that slicing, where we want to move away from slices, and the slices themselves have problems. Oh, right. Let me just go back to just AU Base. There we go. I'll go to any medication profile. They all have the same on medication code. And we've already agreed that we need to do something about this. And we thought that additional bindings is the best way to go here. What we've done is we've used slicing to just identify things that can be used as medicines terminology in Australia. So PBS, GTIN, MIMS, and AMT.
We've also said that you've got to use PBS. Oh no, we don't. Sorry.
No, we don't. And that's one of the reasons why we've recognised that these slices are actually incorrect in the way that they're constructed. Liam.
What would be the base binding in that circumstance? I can see how they sort of all sit side by side, but what's
AMT?
the base?
I think AMT is our preferred. That is our preferred binding, and the rest are additional bindings that then you can use in particular use cases.
What's the binding purpose for those other ones then? Still preferred, or? So
let's go to it then. So I think AMT should be our preferred. And then in terms of additional bindings, I think they're candidate. I think they are
Isn't that the same thing we're talking about?
No, it's not, because when you need to use PBS for an actual billing thing, that is it's not just a preferred. This is the one you use. That's my thought.
But I think you would use them all together.
Yeah, they're like additional bindings. Please send us more than one coding, rather than please send us this as an instead coding.
But that's what I guess I'm saying is a substitute for overall conformance value set in some situations. I still think it's candidate, like how IPS has their things to go in certain circumstances. You might want WHOs rather than SNOMED. But I guess we can argue that out.
I think they're because I think, like, if I was thinking of GP systems, I'd go, oh yeah, you do AMT and PBS probably. So that would be normal. I think they're preferred really, and they're just, if your context requires PBS, you'll use it, and if you care further, you'll actually create conformance constraints.
I think that this set hasn't been worked out with the idea that you may want to encourage people to send multiple codings. I think it's been worked out with the idea that you're encouraging people to send one coding, and that it's not paying attention to the idea if you want to encourage people to send 2 or 3 codings.
I'm not so sure that's true, because that's how IPS has been, I think, using this for some time. I agree it doesn't say that in the definition.
Ruben.
Ruben, did you have your hand up?
Yes,
Ruben has his hand up. Do. I'm going to ponder on which of these purposes I think is appropriate. I was leaning towards preferred, but I've got to think about it. I actually just wanted to make the point regarding the preferred binding, not the additional ones. I know we keep saying AMT, but I think we probably should say SNOMED CT, just because there are a significant number of stakeholders in Australia using their own allocated SNOMED CT identifiers for meds, which aren't covered by the AMT.
Andy has a comment in the chat. His comment is, shouldn't this be up to the constraint of a specific IG that inherits from the base or the core?
Which one? Who the preferred binding is, which we tend to set in Australia, because there is a preferred binding on it anyway, inherited from FHIR.
Yeah, I guess my question is, I understand the reasoning. However, it seems like by trying to force all of this guidance at such a very base level, we end up carrying, when trying to kind of combine all sorts of potential use cases into this single prescribed starting point that's trying to capture all of these potential ways of doing it. I don't know. I feel uncomfortable that we're in some ways using this to overload the guidance that is not necessary at this level. I mean, I've always looked upon AU Base as providing a foundation to build from, and it's necessarily quite broad and generic and not constrained as much as it can be. So I when we talk about a use case for doing this, and maybe we require this combination of codes, I would have thought that that would be left up to that IG for that use case to set the rules it wants.
Which is kind of, I thought, what we were doing. Unless we don't have AU Base, we should be saying some things about the terminology that exists in Australia, and we should work through how we represent that in a way that
I think
provides that information to people. Otherwise, we can just get rid of Base, to be honest.
Yeah, because I think it's saying these would be suitable to use in this slot. How preferred they are is a good question, but it's like, if you are going to do these things, this is how we'd like you to do them as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's like,
suitability, I think, is one thing. To saying these are some of the options we think are useful in Australia, but then how much additional kind of overload do you put on that, the preferential nature of them? Because then we've got to go through and be confident that all of the potential use cases within an Australian context, that all of these designations of preference are appropriate. And I worry that we don't have that foundation of experience.
So what are you suggesting? Sorry, on the, like,
I'm
I hear what
suggesting
you're saying,
less is more.
And what is that? But what is that though? What is the actual suggestion?
My suggestion is that I guess I'm not sure that the existing slices that provide the options are, I'm just not convinced that they're not appropriate.
Well, they're structurally unsound because they say preferred and need to say required here to be legal. But if all this slice does is say, here's 4 preferred things, I'm not sure why having 4 additional bindings that says here's 4 preferred things is somehow more onerous.
It doesn't. It just seems like it's an alternative universe. I don't know what value add we're getting from doing it the other way.
The other way removes the slicing discriminator. So if you're going to derive from AU Base, we want to stay away from slicing as much as possible, so that it lets people, if they choose to use slicing, to set their own discriminators without inheriting those.
Why?
Why do they inherit it through derivation, or why is it a good idea to allow a downstream IG to make their own choices about how they slice?
Yes.
I don't see why that wouldn't be a good idea. Because if you do it by value system, you can never then slice making reference of some of the more complex things like value set, and then have the same code system represented in 2 value sets, even if there's no overlapping codes. So it prohibits the use of some techniques just by us doing this. And I don't think we should be in Base.
One of the things about AU Base is to be as little constraining as possible. And if you've defined a discriminator on an element in Base, then you've actually constrained things in a significant way. So theoretically, it's a bad idea too.
So we are 2 minutes over. So Brett, I just want to ask you, your item number 9. Can we defer, or do you want?
we can happily defer that that one, because it's a more general comeback.
So
on
if Brett is happy to defer that, then you have the rest of the 8 minutes.
Oh, whoops. Okay. What were we talking about? Oh yes, discriminators. and why in base we try, if at all possible, to not do slicing with discriminators. Does anyone else have I guess a comment or a question around that topic?
I thought you are proposing to go similar to the IPS approach to list those as options. The only concern that I have is the concept of candidate as the definition means that is a substitute. I am uncomfortable about the word substitutes or complete substitutes because we are in this particular case, if we follow the IPS pattern, we are saying that, look, these are the options for you to pick. You can use one or more. But the definition itself of candidate is a bit of the concern, in my opinion. But other than that, I'm okay.
They just as preferred, which is SNOMED. I'm just seeing if they had anything similar in medications, including something like immunization, where again, we've got 2 code systems. So yeah, they've got various sets. Yep, sorry.
Yeah, look, I keep hearing this word about this substitute and replace and so forth. I put a comment in the chat. Additional bindings in no way replace or override the primary binding. I just wanted to make that point clear. And I quoted from the FHIR spec in R5, which actually states what I've copied and pasted there. And I believe the extension works in the same way.
I understand
can't override.
That.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand that, but the issue that I take with is the definition of the candidate, which it says that is a candidate to substitute for the overall conformance value set, and the word substitute is the word that I have concern about.
Absolutely, and I think that is a very worthy item to take to international, Stephen, and seek better clarification on the circumstances under which this or the nature of the substitution. I agree that that's terrible wording.
Exactly, or a replacement of this word substitute, which I don't think that it reflects the semantic meaning in plain language what the word candidate is.
Yeah, because if it was indicating suitability, that is kind of what we want to say,
right?
Yeah, but if it's indicating replacement, that's not what we want to say. Yeah,
I mean, as these things are defined, it looks like what the purest way forward would be to define a maximal value set, and then have component bindings for AMT and PBS and all the rest of it.
But you can only do that when you put it as extensible, and I don't think we want to. We don't want to put in actual conformance requirements.
So
we want to list a set of things.
So component cannot be part of a preferred binding?
Sorry, when you said maximal, I thought you meant like the conformance thing that does maximal, which you can either set through element definition or do something up here using maximum binding.
No, I was thinking we define a value set, which is the union of AMT and PBS and all the others. And then we say that the component bindings are, there's AMT as a component binding and PBS as a component binding. And then that would then let us mention each of these things. That seems to be what this structure encourages you to do. And I think that's a very ugly way to do it.
I think it only encourages it if you are concerned with setting saying in Australia, we prefer you to use this and picking one. I think that's really the concern. We've not had that concern in base in the past. We've quite clearly indicated the trend towards SNOMED in all the clinical requirements, and that's across the board, in allergy intolerance and a whole bunch of other places, and has always been really what we've talked about in terms of medications. I'm happy to continue that trend, but I'm also happy if that is not where we want to go. But I really don't like having these chimera giant value sets, which is essentially kind of nothing.
I don't like them either. I think it's I think it's something you'd be driven to by the the availability of the machinery.
So look, I'm probably going to propose something which, and I take Ruben's point about it being SNOMED and just going, the preference is to use SNOMED. Here are these things listed instead of slices as other things that are recognised in Australia. And I think that would be what I will propose, but we'll have a few more people to talk to about that. And bring that back to the FHIR Work Group to see if that's something that we'd like to move to.
Yeah, I think we are almost at time, 2 minutes to time. So I think that would that seems to be a reasonable approach to wrap up today's call. All right. In that case, then I think we would wrap up today's call here, and with some homework to do, and come back in 2 weeks' time to continue some of the discussions.
Okay, thanks, Stephen.
Right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
everyone.
Interesting
Bye.
stuff.
Yep.
Cheers.
See you at the next call. Thank you.